So to begin, my name is Vance Crowe. I run a boutique communications company in St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm the host of the Vance Crowe podcast, where I interview and talk with people that have new ideas, things that other people aren't talking about, they haven't thought about before, and try and bring those ideas up, no matter how controversial or outside of the box they are, just to explore new ways of thinking. So I was really surprised when Corteva reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're thinking about doing a roundtable on carbon credits, and we'd be interested in having you potentially moderate." And the reason I was surprised is because I have been pretty actively and vocal saying that I was very suspicious of carbon. And so I took the meeting with Corteva, and they heard my suspicion right out of the gate. I warned them up front, and they said, "Well, here, just check out what we're doing. Just let us explain it, and then we'll see where you're at." So they did, and I was quite shocked by how they rolled this thing out and the way that they're thinking about it. It's far more in line with kind of my independent mindset and kind of way that I view the world. But I am not a farmer. I have been in the ag world. I worked for formerly Monsanto for many years, and now have traveled around the country and give talks with different ag groups. So I don't actually represent farmers. So after I got done with the call, before I said whether I agreed or not to moderate it, I went out on Twitter and posted, "Hey, this is what I think about carbon credits. What do you think?" And we got hundreds of responses, people talking positively, people talking negatively, people asking questions. And I really got kind of bashful because I thought, hey, Corteva's not going to want me around if I'm asking kind of poking questions. But it turns out a couple days later, Corteva calls and they said, "We loved the discussion you started with your Twitter. We think that all of these questions should be on the table. We want to be probed. Are you interested in moderating this?" And I said, "Hey, if you're willing to take my kind of question on this, I am happy to moderate." So today we're going to do a roundtable. I bet there is not any other group out there doing anything like this. First, Corteva is going to have Ben Gordon talk a little bit about how carbon markets work and what they're thinking about doing and their kind of overall program. He's going to do it in a special way that I'll talk about in just a second. But to keep going through and introducing the guests, we also have Margaret Henry, who represents the buying side of carbon markets. So she's going to come in and talk about what Pepsi's background and interest and what they're planning to do with these. Margaret is an interesting character. You should probably look her up on Google. She has an exceptional education that spans from Brown University, MIT, and has traveled all over the world to understand agriculture from places like Brazil and India, but she comes from a dairy farm. So she knows and I think understands the agricultural world. And then finally, we are going to have Joey Stassel from Stassel Farms, who is a person that has engaged in the Corteva carbon credits program. So he's going to talk about his story, about how he got there, what they're doing, and how it's worked out so far. So this is an interesting and exciting roundtable. I'm glad you're here. I believe that people are going to get a front row seat into a market that is coming. No matter how you feel about this, it is 100% something that people are interested in and trying to figure out how to make it work. And Corteva has taken a shot at saying, we're going to try and do something that represents the way that we think helps the buyer and the seller together. So as we are now going to turn it over to Ben Gordon, and he is going to give a presentation that I think you'll find very interesting. It is called a Pecha Kucha, which is a Japanese style of presenting where Pecha Kucha means chit chat, and they try and cut out all the chit chat. We've all been in those conversations where we're supposed to see a bunch of presentations, and the first guy gets up and talks for an hour, and the next two people don't have any time at all to talk, and everybody's been bored to tears. Well, Pecha Kucha cuts that out because what it says is you have 20 slides, and each slide can only run for 20 seconds. So you really only have about 6 minutes to get all the way through your presentation. And the reason this is so exciting is it's a little bit like watching somebody do figure skating. Many people watch figure skating not because they love to see the triple toe loop, but because they want to see, is that person going to land it? Pecha Kuchas are difficult because they're fast. They have to be succinct, but done well. You will take a group of people that know nothing at all about a subject and give them a crash course in just over 6 minutes. So we're going to hand it over to Ben Gordon to deliver his Pecha Kucha. If, as he is presenting, you think of questions you want me to ask the roundtable, go ahead and use that Q&A button, type in your question, make them whatever you want. Corteva has been extremely open, even to somewhat aggressive questioning. So make sure you do it well and push the envelope. Try and ask tough questions. So now we're going to turn it over to Ben Gordon of Corteva to give his Pecha Kucha. Let's all wish him good luck on this really fast-paced presentation.
Vance, I don't know if you're actually wishing me good luck, given that you compared it to figure skating, and you said the reason you watch figure skating is to watch the fall. So I'll take some evaluation of my own masochism or life choices after this. All right.
So what you see here is the Pecha Kucha gives Ben a few moments to catch his breath. You'll see that these slides go automatically. This is the yellow slide, now the green slide, and he's going to be ready to go here in just a moment.
All right, thanks, Vance. So when we look, why are we here? I think the first and foremost, by folks being attending here and through clear data and what we're hearing from our customers, there is a need for more information. And like Vance said, we think that being transparent upfront is really, really critical for folks to be able to engage in the opportunity that are carbon markets and what we're doing in that. So in the next 6 minutes, what we're going to talk about is what are carbon programs, what's in it for you, what should you be looking for when evaluating these programs, what are the tough questions to ask, and how should you think about it? And then hopefully we'll convince you that we're aligning our incentives, so it's not just trusting me or trusting anyone on my team, but actually being able to ask the questions and look at the contract that we're putting things forward the right way. So what's driving interest today? Simply put, companies are making climate commitments. We work in an industry where we can help both within our industry and beyond. And the way that we are able to bring in those net new dollars is by connecting those companies with farmers and the practices that are driving change. And so from a carbon program standpoint, today it's really hard for a farmer to access that by themselves. There's not a number 2 yellow carbon. There's not a Chicago Board of Trade for carbon. And so a company like Corteva tries to help connect those farmers to buyers like Pepsi by measuring the impact of the practices that farmers bring in and connecting buyers and sellers. So 3 big levers that you probably have all heard in terms of these programs, keeping the soil covered mainly via cover crops, reducing soil disturbance through reduced tillage, and better utilizing our nitrogen. So not necessarily eliminating or even reducing it, but making sure more of that nitrogen goes into the crop, not into the air or the soil. When we look at the big why, it starts with agronomic benefits, the benefits of soil health, yield resiliency. Vance talked about the weather that we're in, and the data that we've seen shows that there are significant benefits to these practices over time. But it's also this net new revenue stream for operations today, but especially in the future where we think there's a lot more pricing upside for farmers. But carbon markets aren't everything. Today, the payments that we're looking at don't cover the cost of these practices. And so it's going to sound a little weird from the guy that's slinging carbon, but you shouldn't sign up for this program unless you believe in the agronomy. It just doesn't pay. And I think we don't want that for the customer. This should be used to de-risk and accelerate your practice transition. So in terms of what these programs really look like, you're looking at a farmer who's willing to commit and implement a practice. You're looking at being able to measure and quantify and then verify those credits so that a buyer knows what they're purchasing is real and knows that those outcomes that we're driving to are real and we're not just greenwashing or throwing something out there. And so what you should look for in this are really 3 big questions. First, am I maximizing the value of my carbon and am I maintaining the optionality to get the upside of this net new revenue stream? Second, is it going to be a pain in the butt to go do this? And to what extent is it going to be a pain? And am I going to have support on this journey? And last, what am I actually committing to? And so when we talk about maximizing the value, we believe that third-party science-based verified credits, these premium credits are really, really important for farmers to see that upside. And you're not just signing up for a program that locks you into maybe one company's interpretation, you're maintaining upside across the whole market in a science-based way. We think that support is really, really important. So we have a dedicated field team that provides support both on the program and agronomically. And you need a lot of data for these programs. And so we believe that it's important to have digital tools that are compatible with what you're using today, as well as that have value beyond carbon. When we talk about commitments, really 2 big things that I want you to think about. One is agronomic flexibility. If I have to go, smooth out some ruts, I'm able to go do that. I don't have some crazy contractual obligation that hurts me agronomically. So that's number one. Number two, I don't want to be locked into just one buyer, or at least I want to have incentives that keep folks like us, frankly, honest across this. And those incentives are important. And so how we think about addressing this are in 3 words: confidence, that I am going to get that upside and that I am going to get a premium price; simplicity, we make it simple and we give you support; and flexibility, again, keeping us honest as a company and as a team so that we are doing right by our customers, not just today, but over time as this market evolves. So for confidence, in our program today, and this is what we're doing, we have guaranteed buyers. That's why we have folks like Margaret on the phone and others. We earn third-party verified premium credits through ESMC, and I urge you to look them up. They're a really, really solid, interesting organization. And we're paying folks on outcomes so that you get access to the upside and you're not locked into some dollar per acre numbers that are pretty low today. On simplicity, use our free tool, Granular Insights. We have that dedicated support that we talked about, and you get to control where your data goes. It's just because you sign up for a program doesn't give us all of your rights. There's still the appropriate opt-ins and control, even down to the software clicks level. From flexibility, you get to choose the practices that work for you. So that's one of the reasons we look at outcomes, not paying on practices, is because we understand there's a lot of variability out there, and not every practice works for every single acre or every farm. We give you opt-outs in the contract, so you have to keep us honest. The only reason we have that 10 years is because we also want to commit that there's going to be a length. And so what it looks like from our initiative is, we think there's the opportunity to earn $5 to $20 a year by introducing cover crops or reducing your tillage. Today, we're in Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa. We're hoping to add in nutrient management on the practices, and we know that we're going to expand, probably triple or quadruple the amount of states that we're in this year. And so how our program works: choose your practice. You use Granular Insights, free tool to securely log your data. And so what you're going to need to provide is your as planted data, your nitrogen management data, your harvest data, and then what you did from a tillage and cover cropping perspective, all in the tool. You can then use that for agronomic or financial analysis. We'll go run soil samples at no cost to you. And then we'll work with ESMC to go verify and quantify those credits so they can then be sold. So we guarantee you $15 a ton. We guarantee you that there's a buyer out there. And then, as this continues in the next cycle, you get to keep us honest because we have to earn your business on an ongoing basis. So you have that flexibility. And so the takeaways that I would urge you to have from this presentation: first, make sure the ROI of that practice is real. Agronomy, then carbon. Second, if you are excited about that practice, ask the tough questions. And number 3, don't let the opportunity pass you by. And one of the things we'll get to in the Q&A is additionality is really important. This isn't an opportunity where you can sit on the sidelines. So we're at the end of this. These are just 3 questions that I think we need to really address, but I know there's a heck of a lot more, and I've already seen a few come in the Q&A. So really looking forward to the discussion here. And Vance, I appreciate you putting me on the high wire and not screwing up too much yet, thanks to a little bit of practice.
Hey, that was great, Ben. I've seen people crash and burn on those, so I'm impressed that you were able to pack so much information in. Let's get straight into the questions. You said right out of the gate that it's not going to pay for itself. So tell me, a farmer in the modern age, why in the world would they start doing something that's not going to pay for itself?
I'd maybe actually throw that over to Joey, because I'd say he has a heck of a lot more expertise than I do, and then I can give maybe some broad answers if that works for you, Vance.
Well, we can. Let me give you. Why don't I try and give you kind of the general chance, and we'll introduce Joey a little bit later in the thing. Like, just talk a little bit about how you thought about that, because that's a pretty profound statement to say. Don't do this if you don't see how it works with the agronomy.
Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, I think if regardless of where you look, I mean, cover crops is a great example. It's going to go somewhere between $20 and $40 to go implement a cover crop program in most geographies. If we're telling you $5 to $20, I mean, it doesn't take a genius. Even a North Dakotan can figure out that that math doesn't really add up. And so you need to really think, well, why the heck do folks do cover crops before carbon? A lot of people have. And it's for the soil health benefits, the yield resilience, and just the stewardship of the land, the legacy that they have, and the long-term yield. The other thing that we've thought of in this space is the agronomy matters, but are there other levers to increase the profitability here? And so where do government programs fit in? Other cost shares and things like that, because a lot of the costs are early on in that transition cycle. So we just wanted to lean into that, because I think the last thing I want to do is ask somebody to sign up for a program and make commitments that aren't right for their operation.
So you got a couple of people asking, "Hey, I've been doing cover crops for 20 years. I've been doing things on my farm for 5 years. How does that get factored into the Corteva system?"
Yeah, I mean, just to be completely upfront, like it's one of the things that don't work in carbon markets today. And so if we look at those premium assets that I talked about, they require this concept of additionality. And so buyers want their dollars to contribute to net new impact or net new change. I'd say Pepsi is probably one of the more farmer focused groups. When I talk about buyers, don't just hold that against Pepsi and Margaret. But I think, broadly speaking, there are climate rules and there are buyer demands that require that net new change. And I think we thought it was important to bring this to market and this opportunity to market so that agriculture can be seen as contributing to climate change and not just be seen as a contributor against it. And the efforts that we make going forward can both help a large subset of farmers as well as kind of help us with our kind of social mandate to operate as an industry, so that we still continue to see some carrots and not just sticks coming forward.
The questions have been rolling in. So if you guys have questions, this is actually really helpful because we get some of the same, and then I start seeing which ones are on everyone's minds. One that comes up is, how will carbon credits be handled? Will the field soil tests be to verify, or will you just utilize computer models? I know you mentioned this a little bit in there, but could you expand on that, Ben?
Yeah, so at a field level or a farm level, the soil testing is used to initialize that model, and then you use the data that we capture through granular insights to go do the biogeochemical modeling. Fancy word for it, they just simulate what happens to look at the credit over several years. At year 5 in the program and year 10, we will resample so that we can see where things are at that project level to make sure that these outcomes are real and it's not just smoke and mirrors. And that also resets the model so that we can reduce the variability in the measurement today.
So let's talk about, do you guarantee a buyer for all of the credits you produce? I mean, if you get everybody going, people get excited, is there going to be a limit to how much you guys are willing to be able to put a market together?
So we today have had an acreage limit that anyone who signs up for our program, we will guarantee that buyer. I don't think it's a fair ask to farmers to say, especially in the ambiguity that exists today, to say, hey, not only sign up for us, but hey, we might not pay you. So in our contract, we guarantee that you will be paid that $15 a ton for what's quantified, because that's a risk that I think a company like Corteva is well positioned to take, along with several other partners down the value chain, because I think we need to earn the right with farmers to play in this space.
So you mentioned, $15 a ton. How do you, give me an idea for how much does it take to get a ton of carbon sequestered?
Yeah, so great question. It depends. I mean, it's the same answer you get anytime you ask an agronomic question. It depends. That depends on your soil, your practices, and what you do, the weather that year. So the way that I would just generally think about it when I'm talking to folks is, what has historically been the organic matter at your farm? Like, what's your moisture level? If you have more moisture and you have kind of thicker, blacker dirt, you probably have a higher chance to sequester that carbon out there versus, maybe Western North Dakota, where some of my family's from, where there's just not the same kind of amount. Generally, we see, somewhere around a half a ton for a practice like no-till or cover cropping, and they can add on to each other. And oftentimes you do multiple of these practices, you'll see more than that half a ton. Again, rule of thumb, there's some good tools out there, and we'll have something here pretty shortly to help people look at, hey, for their farm, what does this really mean?
So, Ben, if somebody jumps in early, I mean, Corteva, Pepsi, this is very early stages of this next round of trying to make carbon markets work, but it's hot right now, so demand could go up. What happens if prices on carbon sequestration go up over the 10-year contract that you're making an agreement towards?
Yeah, so one of the things that we thought of kind of right out of the gate is I don't want to be the counterparty to someone like Joey or other customers. I don't want to speculate against them. And so, for us, it's always going to be at least 75% or more of the credit will go to the farmer to cover our costs. That's why we have opt-outs. So we have to re-earn that business. And that's one of the beautiful things about ESMC is that there's other buyers out there. And we need to make sure that farmers are able to participate in that upside because, frankly, folks are smart. Like they see where things are going and they see those same trends that you're talking about, Vance. And, they don't want to play for the $15 a ton right now. They want to play for if it's, 20, 30, 40 down the road.
ESMC, tell me a little bit about that. Who is that? That seems like an acronym I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, so it's the Ecosystem Service Market Consortium. It's a nonprofit group that encompasses agribusiness companies as well as the commodity groups. So, American Soybean Association and others in there, and they're trying to provide market infrastructure out there. So they provide the measurement, the quantification. They work on the verification, and they also help to connect buyers and sellers. And so we just thought, having that kind of market-based mechanism provides more accountability and some pretty darn good science. And the representation of the commodity groups was important just because it keeps everyone honest.
So let's talk about if somebody starts putting their land into this carbon credits market, and then they decide, you know what, I got to sell this land. What happens? Have you just indentured that land to be in carbon credit markets if the next farmer doesn't want to do it, or what goes on there?
Yeah, so I think our hope is that there's so much value that it would actually be a net positive for selling that land and that the next players. We don't have any clawbacks in our or covenants or constraints in our contracts. I think it's something that I'd really urge folks to look like for any contract that they sign. Again, we're a little bit in the early days, and so we're not going to ask the farmers to bear that risk. We're frankly bearing some of that risk. So if that carbon were to be re-emitted, that's something that we're going to have to handle on our side.
So we have gotten a lot more questions, and I hope they keep rolling in. We're going to keep doing more questions, and I'll put Ben back on here in just a second. But I want to hand it over to the buyer of carbon credits, because at the end of the day, that's the part that kind of makes my mind explode. Who on earth wants to buy a carbon credit, and what in the world are you going to do with it? So why don't we bring Margaret in from Pepsi? And Margaret, I'd be very interested in your answer on this. Why in the world is Pepsi interested in buying carbon credits?
Sure. So if you look at it from our perspective, as a big company, we've got a climate goal. So we got a climate goal that crosses everything that we buy, including a whole lot of agricultural products, a whole ton of corn for all those Doritos and Cheetos and Fritos that you love, as well as the Pepsi and the beverage products. And we are required basically by a lot of those external groups, if they're NGOs, if they're some of the buyer groups, consumers, if it's the Walmarts of the world who then sell our products, we're required to have carbon goals. And as a leading company, we've said we're not just going to do like the bare minimum that's required. We actually have seen that we rely on farmers. Without farmers producing really good corn, we can't sell any of those Doritos and Cheetos and whatnot. So not only do we do this because we're kind of required by those external groups, but we do it because we want there to be a future for farming. And we need farmers to be successful for us to be successful. That, I think, is the leading edge. Most companies are in the sort of we're required to do this stage. And it's why some of those rules that I'm seeing in the Q&A are coming up. We are held, we don't really have the choice. It's these NGOs that set the science that say these have to be new practices for us to consider Pepsi's reductions as credible. Because if the farmers have been doing them all the time, then what has Pepsi done that's anything different than just greenwashing, than just saying, oh, yeah, our Doritos are great because farmers have been no-tilling forever. Yeah, what the heck did Pepsi do? So they're asking us to make this something where we create some kind of change in the system. We actually see more value in this stuff than just carbon credits. So we are also doing things like $10 an acre for cover crops, even for people who've been doing it. We are also doing other programs outside the carbon market because we know this stuff is important to farm longevity, farm resilience, apart from the carbon issue. It's only one part of how we want to work with farmers is the carbon credits.
So as I think about other initiatives that have been used to try and preserve the environment, things like the CRP program, they have drawbacks, at least in the beginning, right? Where, what was being used as pasture land now becomes dry brushland where more wildfires get started. What is Pepsi going to do to make sure that they don't accidentally set off a cascade of things that aren't in the best interest of the land because people are maximizing short-term values for whatever that could be?
Yeah, I know it's a huge problem with the carbon market. When we approach working with farmers, we think of it as a three-legged stool. And without any one of those stools, it's all going to fall over. One of them is the financial. Another one is the agronomic. You got to have good agronomy. You got to have someone who's going to know that region, I mean, I grew up in Kentucky. I don't know a darn thing about corn in Iowa, really, compared to a local agronomist. You need someone who knows that area, who's working with the farmers on what the right practices are. I mean, if we're going to try to make every farmer in south central Nebraska put in cover crops, they're going to look at us like we're crazy for good reason. And the third leg of that stool is the social cultural. I mean, you have to figure out how to help farmers help farmers. There's leading farmers on all kinds of things in all these regions. There's farmers who have tried it and it has failed and it has dramatically hurt their operations. We need to connect farmers to each other to share that local insight. Just bringing in an agronomist expert is not everything. You need to really understand that local area and the cultural and make it easier to do these practices. I mean, I've heard of farmers say, like, I'm not going to do no-till because I go to church and my pastor says my field looks dirty. Like, that's just as important as some fancy right answer pie in the sky idea from a fancy agronomist.
So tell us a little bit about the future plans of Pepsi. Will we see, these Doritos were made with offset carbon credits on the bag, or are these going to stay just in sustainability reports among people that look at these sorts of things?
Well, I'll speak for the industry of food and beverage and then Pepsi specifically. A lot of our peers, a lot of our competitors are looking at, is there any kind of marketing thing out there about it? We're not particularly diving in hard on that because the market for sustainable Pepsi Cola, it's not why we're doing this. We're doing this because we rely on those agricultural products into the future. There are others who are looking at the market aspect. But it also touches on the fact that I think carbon markets in agriculture should be for companies that buy food and beverage, and they should do it in their supply chains where they're buying from their farmers, rather than selling this to the Microsofts and the Googles of the world who don't know a darn thing about farming. That's not an opinion held by every company that wants to buy a lot of carbon credits from farmers. But that's, I think, just makes sense because we want to actually stay connected to our farmers and not just make this something that could produce all those unintended consequences that you talked about, Vance.
Well, I mean, if you're willing to kind of be a pushy on the rest of the industry, what are concerns that Pepsi has about, what could happen when the big players, the Microsofts of the world, get into carbon markets? What is it that you're trying to do to prevent, wrong turns, I guess?
Well, they're saying this lovely little phrase that the carbon markets world is a wild west, which basically is true. And the more buyers you come in, the more questionable actors you're going to have in the middle, trying to start up programs that are not as good as what Ben talked to. I mean, Corteva is not the only one we're working with, but we have some criteria on credibility to farmers for any of these actors. If you start having so much more interest, then you're going to have questionable things happen. And if the scientists at the end of the day then say, sequestration's not valid or companies can't claim it or whatever, who's stuck with the blame? It's the farmers. It's not all those middlemen who have made all the money between now and then. It's the farmers who are now then told your carbon doesn't count. You tilled, and so now you have to pay back money or something. We don't want to see that happen. But with more and more interest of folks who don't know anything about agriculture, it's possible for some of those middle players to take advantage. That's my biggest fear in that.
So I'm not sure if this is the right question for you, but since you have such a big overlay, we have a question. The U.S. Senate just overwhelmingly passed a bill to have the USDA direct carbon marketplace. Not sure all the details, but how do you see the government playing a role in this market and directing the standards versus, say, the private market like you're in?
It's a big question. It doesn't have a single answer, but I'd say that there are certain things that you probably need a little bit of a sheriff in town so you don't have the bad actors. And so if the government can weed out the really bad actors with some standards so that farmers don't get left being sold really bad ideas, I think that that's positive. I think there's places where the private market is going to have to play. I think there's also a role if, a new program, if Ben's program rolls out and he doesn't find a buyer, if the government agrees to buy those credits, in the end, if he doesn't find a buyer, that's good for the farmers. So I think there's a role for them to play.
Well,
I don't think I'll have a whole lot to say over what that role is, but, I think there's a lot of folks with a lot of interest, and all the commodity groups are having opinions, and it's a good place to pay attention to.
So to round up the questions with just you, and then we're gonna expand it in and bring Joey in. Who else in the space right now besides Pepsi is doing kind of leading edge things? Who are other contemporaries that you're looking around saying they've got some interesting ideas or we're learning from them?
Well, I think we look at it at different levels. The first is the farmer level, where there's some really amazing farmer leaders. And then there's those sort of folks who are helping out the farmers. If it's independent groups, if it's commodity groups, we're working a lot with Practical Farmers of Iowa there, Illinois Corn Growers Association. We're starting to work with Corteva, Soil and Water Outcomes Fund, trying to understand that space. If you look up to sort of the space of where the PepsiCos are, I think we're leading the way with some of our peers. If it's a Unilever, if it's a Kellogg, if it's a Mars, if it's a General Mills, and we're often trying to find a place where we're going to buy the corn or the soy, and somebody else is going to buy the other product, so that that farmer can just get one coherent message. I mean, when we're doing it outside of the carbon market and we're just paying a cover crop cost share, we try to find all the different sort of buyers in a region wherever we can, so that it's just one program and so that it's actually tied to our supply chains. And if you look above that, I think World Resources Institute, WRI, is setting a lot of the rules, greenhouse gas accounting protocol, science-based targets. These are the folks that listen to like the World Wildlife Funds and the Nature Conservancies and the Environmental Defense Funds that they set the rules we have to follow. So it's a pretty big group. We really like the Midwest Row Crop Collaborative because it brings together a lot of different folks to actually talk really honestly about some of those unintended consequences you're talking about and work together pre-competitively. Because this could be an area where we compete with all those companies I said. But if you get right down to it, that's not going to help any of us. It's not going to help the farmers we rely on. So we try real hard to work together.
Well, thank you, Margaret. We're going to bring Joey in now. We'll probably have more questions for you. I see a lot of people. I mean, you generated a lot of questions, and keep them coming in that Q&A. Joey, we're going to turn to you. Could you give us a little bit of background? Where is your farm located? How did you get involved with this carbon credit program with Corteva, and how's it been going so far?
Yeah, thanks, Vance. We're in north central Illinois. We've been looking at it for a couple years now. I've been talking to a couple different companies, and Corteva kind of piqued our interest mainly because they were the easiest to work with so far. And I kind of liked how their structure was set. It's still in the beginning phases, but I mean, it's been going really well as far as that goes.
So let's talk about day one when you start working with Corteva. Are you filling out mountains of paperwork? Are you, like what's happening when you first start it?
I mean, there's a little bit of paperwork. I wouldn't say mountains, but I mean, just like with any other program, they're trying to figure out, your background, what you do, your history. But tell me any government program or anything like that doesn't require that kind of information. So.
And then, so what kind of practices did you start putting into place that you weren't before? And how would you say this has impacted what you're doing day in and day out?
Well, to start out with, I mean, this isn't for everyone. It's high management, and it's not for every acre either. We've done cover crops. We started out, with a field there. And then we started implementing strip till with the cover crops. And then we're getting into nitrogen management with our strip till, side dress, stuff like that. But take baby steps is my biggest advice, because trying to do it, jumping off the deep end of the pool and diving right in, there's going to be mistakes. And even taking baby steps, there's mistakes, there's learning curve, it takes a while to get in the groove of things, to learn what works best and what doesn't. And there's stuff that I do that, might not work for farmer 10 miles down the road. It's kind of your baby, and you kind of just figure out what works best for your operation.
So a lot of people have been asking, Are you able to step up the practices, or do you have to say, oh, these are the practices we're going to implement, and now as we're planting, we're doing all of them right away? And is there, you said baby steps. How does this work?
Uh, I mean, I don't think you have to do them all right away. I know there's some fields where we have cover crops that we didn't strip till. There's some fields that we have cover crops and strip till. There's some fields where we just strictly strip till, and then there are some fields that we haven't even implemented any of this stuff on yet, just because I don't think those fields are. I'm not ready to take that jump on those fields yet because they're a little bit more challenging fields to do something like that.
So that brings up a great question. Like, how did you decide, what field this is right for, and how nervous are you that you're going to take, a yield hit or some other hit that won't be offset by the amount that they're paying?
So most of our flat black square fields it got implemented on because they're easy to manage. We have some timber grounds, rolling hills, not square fields that I want to get it down pat with the fields that we know the best, that are easy to farm, that you have to try not to do good on those fields. And then we have one field that I'm a little nervous about because we planted like 50 pounds of trit out there, and we weren't able to get over there and strip till. We weren't able to get over there and terminate the cover crop in a timely fashion. So now we have waist high cover crops, and we planted corn right into it. And I'm just a little bit nervous about that field, but I mean, the corn has overcome the cover crops now, and especially with this rain, and then we did some side dressing. It's looking really good, but there's about 2 weeks there where I was like, oh, I don't know about this. We might take a pretty good hit on this field, but yeah.
So some people have been asking to talk just a little bit about more. How are you doing strip tilling, and what is different about this than what you've done in the past?
I mean, we're big on putting fertilizer in the spring. We don't do much of it in the fall. But we're strip tilling with anhydrous. We're working towards putting dry on with our strip till. It's a big investment though to go that way. But I really like the way strip tilling works because you get that nice seed bed, but yet you're leaving the ground undisturbed in between the rows. You're leaving a nice mat of cover crops that, we still have done some spraying because, like I said, we haven't perfected it yet. And that's what we're working towards. But we have reduced our chemical cost as far as that goes.
So a lot of this is going to come down to the testing, right? So you're going to have your soil tested. Are you going to be up at night wondering, how much carbon they're going to say that you've been able to sequester, or is this not really a concern of yours?
So, I like the carbon credit program because it's going in the right direction of more sustainable agriculture. But at the end of the day, it's not really the biggest concern for me because we did this change to help support our soil structure, to better our farms, to where, and Ben talked about this, and he kind of said something about asking me about this question as far as, the payment being going towards the farmer, and is it worth it? Well, it's not so much that $15 to $20 an acre. It's more or less, we've reduced our fertilizer. We're more precise with our fertilizer location. We don't have the chemical costs as we did before. And our soil is it's been healthier. Our organic matter, we've seen on some fields where we've done a little bit of it in the past, it just keeps going up. And that's more the thing. If you're looking at it, like Ben was saying, just for getting that $20 an acre, it's more or less almost like a lifestyle change. You eat better, drink water, you have a healthier body. This is what we're talking about with the soil. We're trying to better our soil health.
So, I mean, every operation's different, but if you're farming with other people, you got to get them on board. How are those conversations about, hey, we're going to try this new thing? How'd that go for you?
So I farm with my dad, and if you would have told me 10 years ago we'd be doing this, I would have told you you're crazy. But he was a lot more reluctant to do it than I thought. I thought it was going to take years and years, because that's what it has in the past, to try and do some of these changes. But he's dove in head first with me on this, and he said he wouldn't change it any other way. He's like, this works. I like it. I don't want to do anything else.
Well, Joey, we're going to open it up to the entire panel. We've got tons of questions in here. Some are for Ben, some for Margaret, some for you. So we'll keep going. Before we do, we're going to open up the poll and ask, is the carbon credit program so far, we've done about 45 minutes, something you're interested in having somebody from Corteva contact you about? So would you like to learn more about whether the carbon credit program can work for you? Carbon and they'll have the specialist reach out to you. So we'll let that run for a little bit. Make sure you take that poll. As we go to the wider group and ask for questions that anybody could answer, there was a question about Canada. So this is probably going to you, Ben. We have one listener who used a VPN to get in and wants to learn a little bit more about how it's going in the United States. How quickly do you think this will spread out to not just the rest of the United States, which would be interesting to find out, but even into other countries?
Yeah, so I think there's definitely opportunity in other markets. We focused on the U.S. just because I think it's pretty clear, even with the recent bill that you mentioned when talking with Margaret, like there's going to be a role for private markets in Canada. There's a lot more government intervention, and so I think one of the big things we're looking at right now is just what will be the right role for Corteva. We shouldn't play every role in the market in every market. So working with our team that works with farmers there and a few other groups. So no immediate plans, but I'd say Canada is certainly on the horizon just because we serve quite a few farmers in that market.
I'm going to jump in there, Vance, if I can, because we're the biggest buyers of oats out of Canada and buy a whole lot of canola too, and just say that we see a need for some of this stuff in Canada, but quite frankly, a lot of the farmers there have been doing this stuff forever. And so our question there is a different one. It's not necessarily how can we stand up a carbon market, and there's so much more going on the government side, but it's more how can we support the farmers, and what do they need support in? I mean, farmers there have been doing no-till for more than 20 years. Cover crops in some places aren't applicable. We'll see in 10 years they might be growing corn up in Canada. I mean, we're already seeing corn and soy being planted in places that was never a thought before. But some of these practices are just a little bit different. And it's the same thing if you look at northern U.S. and southern U.S. I mean, you need different stuff. It's not that cover crops and no-till are the only answer and the answer everywhere for carbon or for, I mean, I wish this conversation was about farm resilience, but carbon is trying to be a proxy for that. So different places, different practices. Who knows what we do in Canada politically, but there needs to be farmer support for the next things.
So this goes probably for Ben, but Joe, you might have some insight into this. Are you contracting with the farmer, the landowner, or both? How does this work on rented land? Yep.
Yeah. So the farmer, and so we have a little bit more flexibility because we're in within the supply chain. There's just a little bit more flexibility there versus some of the other markets. And so, our customers that we contract with have to have control over that land effectively in the contract. But we're not asking, for a long-term agreement with the landlord. We think that we don't want to get in the middle of that. And we think the farmer is the right arbiter of deciding, what's the right acre for both the practice and the program.
So we've been getting some questions about data. What happens to my data throughout the process? Does it stay between me and Corteva, or can the buyers of the marketplace access it? What does all that look like?
I think we're pretty darn lucky where ESMC has very strict data privacy agreements, and then the buyers we work with actively do not want that data because we were lucky to work with buyers who are smart enough to recognize how farmers would perceive that. And so, every time the data moves, farmer has to opt into that. And even within what is in the art of the possible with opt-in, it still cannot be used for any, of our sales enablement. Our sales team can't see anything that's related to that without permission. And certainly other organizations can't as well.
And Joey, how has that felt for you? You're putting data up there. This has been a big concern of farmers across a bunch of different domains, but now to add carbon sequestration, any concerns on your part about your data, your farm data?
I don't really have any concerns because if they want it, you're going to have to give it up to, get into some of these programs. It's just everything you use. We use Field View and all that stuff, and it's out there. So, if somebody really wants it, they're going to get it at the end of the day. But I think you're going to need the data to back any practice you're doing. And if you feel that you should get paid for it, a lot of guys can just sit there and say, yeah, I'm doing this. But unless there's proof that you are doing it, I don't think you're going to get paid unless you have data and records and they can view those data and records. So, like I said, if they want it, they can have it because, you just need proof that you're doing it. So I'm not really too worried about it.
So, Margaret, this it's probably a good question for you. The Kyoto Agreement has been around since the early 2000s. There have been other attempts to do carbon markets. What's different now than 20 years ago?
Consumer interest is really different. Our customers, the Walmarts and Targets of the world, their interest is really different. The external pressure on companies like us is at a place it wasn't. When Kyoto Protocol was going around, that was mostly pressure on governments for societal change. Now there's pressure on the private sector. For us to be successful, we have to make commitments. We have to step up. And there's largely been, I think, there's now starting to be, hopefully, a shift from risk to resilience. And that's where we are. Kyoto Protocol was all about risk. Let's mitigate our risk as humans, make sure we can live. Pepsi's now talking resilience. Like, how do we make sure that farmers are able not only to reduce the amount of carbon that goes up, but to adapt to what's coming? Like, there's a certain amount of floods and droughts and heat waves and everything else that is here. And those 100-year events that are happening every 5 years, this stuff also helps farmers keep farming through that. So between the external pressure and the real tangible risk to our supply chain that we are seeing today, there's an increased acknowledgement that we need to do this now, and we need to do it faster. That pressure is only going to get more, and it's only going to come faster to every industry on Earth. And we want to make farmers part of the solution, not part of the problem, because that message is real tricky out there. It depends who's telling it.
We've gotten a couple of questions asking, do you think the things that are right now optional will eventually become mandated by the government?
There's no way to mandate a particular farming practice for anyone who's ever been on a farm. North side of the field and the south side of the field sometimes need something different. That might not stop people from trying, but I don't see it being extremely prescriptive. You might have things that you can't do, but I think it'll be hard to have things that you have to do per se.
So we're going to round out here. If anybody hasn't taken the poll, would you like to learn more about whether a carbon program can work for you? And a carbon specialist will reach out. Go ahead and answer that. But we're going to wrap up with last word from people. Ben, you've had a chance to listen to people's questions. You had a chance to go through your Pecha Kucha. What is a take-home message that you want to have as you guys are kind of on the forefront of carbon markets?
Yeah, say it again, make sure the agronomy makes sense, as Joey elaborated on way better than I could say, because it has to make sense for your farm. Otherwise, it's not going to do us any good on the carbon side either. And then I think the biggest thing that we haven't talked about that I'd really urge folks to think about is this is a bit of a fleeting opportunity. So if you are going to adopt these practices for the agronomy, the way the additionality rules, the eligibility rules work is, you don't sign up for one of these programs, you're not going to be eligible in the future. And so we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place of, hey, I want to wait and see how the market shakes out, but I also want to take advantage of this opportunity. Give us a look, give other folks a look. I obviously care, but take a good hard look, because I think this is a real opportunity for farmers. And I think it is something that will encourage these practices, especially over some of the hurdles that Joey talked about, because you might make some mistakes, and that extra $5 to $20 an acre helps to de-risk that. It's not going to solve the whole thing, but hopefully it helps. And then hopefully the rest of us keep putting our best foot forward and hold us all accountable as we do that.
And Joey, how about you? What are your kind of concluding thoughts? People are on the fence about it. Should they, what should they be thinking about?
I would say try a field, not 20 fields. And I when I talk to guys around here, if you're gonna try it, I would suggest going into soybeans, at least for around here. I mean, everyone's, I know there's different crops growing around the country and the world, but we're corn, soybeans, some wheat around here. Try going ahead of soybeans. I mean, it's a lot easier to manage than going ahead of corn, especially if you're using grasses like either wheat or cereal rye or triticale ahead of corn. It is a very high management, and I would hate to see anybody get discouraged by doing it, by trying to do that right away. So when we first tried as soybeans, I know there was a question in there about failures. Well, as 2019, we had cereal rye that's 6 foot tall. That was terrible trying to plant that. And I just thank God for RTK, because I had no idea where I was in the field. And it was a big learning curve that year. We learned a lot, and you don't learn from good years. So just try it out on a field, a 40, a 20 acre patch, something like that. I wouldn't go, hog wild trying it out. And surround yourself with people who are doing it, or, have done it, because they can give you a bunch of knowledge. And that's, I've had a couple guys that I talked to when I first started, telling me, do this, don't do that. You read this and you read that, but it's not always what happens in the real world. So that would be my big takeaway, is just try it out. Like I said, 20 acres, a 40 acre field, something like that. Do split a field, something, but yeah.
All right, Joey, thank you. And Margaret, on to you. What is the final word? A year from now, what do you think the carbon markets will look like, and what do you want to impart with people as they're thinking about starting this up?
Everything Ben and Joey said, was right on. Think about your options. Really do some research. Ask 2 people you trust and ask 3 people you don't trust. Get a couple of different opinions. And as Joey said, start small if you're going to start making changes to your operations. Because the point should be about securing your operations. The point shouldn't be about selling some new product, which is now your carbon. That should be a side benefit, because if that's your only point, you're going to do silly stuff that is going to hurt you in the long term for sure. And the last point I'll leave you with is we need more farmer voices in these dialogues. So raise your hands, talk to your farmer organizations, talk to your representatives, talk to your supply chain. The farmer voice is really critical, and it's not always front and center. So, Vance, I really appreciate you bringing us all together and making sure, Joey, that your voice was in here and that we got to have all these Q&A. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you, Margaret, more. I think farmers would be really surprised about how much of an impact they can have if they sit on a panel, if they call up an organization, because there are a lot of companies that are trying to do things that are right by the farmer, but they just don't know any farmers. Or if they do, they only know 1 or 2. So putting your hand up and saying, I'll participate by answering your questions or tell you what I'm concerned about. So thank you, Margaret, for that point. And I do want to thank all of Corteva's carbon and ecosystem services team for putting this together. I think this was a really unique thing to do a Pecha Kucha, to invite a guy on like me that's relatively suspicious of programs like this, and really just to put people together and say, ask us your questions. So I want to thank everyone for putting this on. And then if you're interested in having a Corteva carbon specialist explore the program with you, you can go to corteva.com/carbon and sign up for a specialist to reach you. You can, if you'd like more resources to evaluate the carbon program, Corteva has a blog put up there. I can tell you that Ben has done a couple of interviews, one with the Farm for Profit podcast, which was an excellent description of the whole ecosystem. So definitely there's a lot more information out there. You can always have your Pioneer seed rep talk with you about it. So if you are interested in this program, reach out to Corteva and definitely tell them thank you for putting together a program like this, because it's rare. Not everybody's willing to put themselves out there like this. So thank you to Corteva, and thank you to all of you for coming to join us.